friends. So we have already done the first step of drawing out our pattern pumpkins, and today we get to start the fun step of painting it. So we're going to use watercolors. Watercolor trays will look like this. Even if it's something like this where you can see the bottom, most of you will be able to have enough paint to make this work. So you can stir up the corners and the sides, and you should have plenty of paint. So before you paint, you have to activate and kind of wake up your colors. So what I'd like to do as the first step is I like to get a little bit of water into the colors I know I'm going to be using. So I'm going to take a couple drips and put them in my red, put a couple drips of water in my orange, and we're going right down the line because we're going to use almost every color. I'm going to be using green today, some blue, and some purple. So that will just help get our colors ready. We still need to stir them up, but having the water starting to soak helps. Okay, so make sure your water cup is off to the side. Your paper is on a messy paper to keep your tables clean. And we're going to start with yellow. So when you first start to paint, you really want to give this a good stir to wake up the color and to make it nice and vibrant. If you don't stir it a lot, the color will be very weak and it won't show up very bright. So you want to really, really stir, especially if it's your first time kind of using it. So I'm stirring it up, and we're going to start by adding yellow all over our pumpkin. Okay, you don't have to be too careful about doing one section at a time like I'm going to, but if I accidentally spill out into the next section, it's not a big deal because we're going to blend all these colors together anyways. The pumpkin's not going to stay plain yellow. Make sure you stir every time you dip back in also. That's important to make sure that you're picking up a lot of the color. So you'll need to dip back into your water every now and then, and you'll also need to stir to make sure that you have enough water and enough pigment, that's the color on your brush. Okay, so I've got most of my pumpkin painted yellow, and I don't have to worry about the edges because I'm going to show you what we're going to do with the edges next. Okay, now pumpkins are usually not yellow, they're usually orange. So now we're going to go into the orange. So I'm stirring my brush, and I'm going to stir up the orange really good. Okay, I do tap my brush off so I'm not adding like drips and tons of water. We don't want it to be drippy and messy, but I'm stirring up my orange really good. And now we're going to start at the tops and the bottoms of our pumpkin, and we're going to pull that orange right into the yellow. Now I am going to be a little more careful not to go outside the shape of my pumpkin. So I'm letting the orange meet the yellow. I'm overlapping a little bit, and I can go right up at the side. Okay. If you don't want your brush to smush and your bristles to go crazy, I don't press hard with the brush. Okay, so if I only wanted to do a tiny little line of color, I'm only putting the brush very gently on there so it's just the tip of the bristles that hit the paper. Okay, so I'm doing my tops of the pumpkin, and I can do the bottoms. And since I'm not painting as much, I'm not having to dip back into the color as often, which is helpful. And then once I get all the tops and bottoms done, I'm going to go and kind of pull my brush along the black lines for each section. And that's going to help blend that orange color into the yellow. Okay, so I'm just kind of running it right along the edges. And the colors are starting to blend together. Okay. So now you can see it's starting to look a little bit more like an orange pumpkin, but we want it to look 3D. We want to make it look as round as possible. So we're actually going to add a third color onto this.
At this time, would all parent pickup students please report to your hallways?
Okay. Now for the third color, we're actually going to add a little bit of red. But I have a lot of water on here already. I don't want to add a ton more, so I'm going to rinse off my brush, tap it off pretty good, stir up my red. Okay. Get that color nice and active. And then just to make sure I don't have too much water, I am going to take my brush and I'm just kind of drying it off a little bit on the side just to make sure I don't have a ton of water because I only want to add a little bit. I'm going to add a little bit of red, same as before, to the tops and bottoms of my pumpkins. I'll start there. Okay, if the red's starting to get mixed up with the orange, which it is pretty good for me, you can always dip back in And just make sure you don't have too much water by wiping it off a little bit on the side. And I'm very gently just running a little bit of red along the top and the bottom. And what that does is it makes the top and the bottom of my pumpkin darker, because that's normally how the shadows work, because the pumpkin is round. So whenever something's round, the edges usually will look a little darker than the middle parts that pop out. And because the paper is wet, the colors are going to soak in and sort of blend together. So just like I did with the orange, I'm going to run that red also along these lines to emphasize these little bumps that curl in on my pumpkin. Okay. And that should look nice and three-dimensional now. And over time, all this paint is going to soak in, and the colors will mix together a little bit more right as they soak into the paper. Okay. So before I move on, sometimes I'll clean off my brush, dry it off a little bit so I'm not adding any extra water, and I'll kind of run my brush along any areas that I would like to blend a little more. So right there, I didn't see the orange pulling into the yellow too much. So with a clean brush, I'm kind of overlapping and pulling those in. Okay, so there is my pumpkin. So now I'm going to give my brush a good stir. Change colors now. Now I'm going to work from the top down, I think. So I'm going to do the sky. So my sky colors, we have a little more freedom to kind of let the paint flow. So I'm going to stir up with my blue first. And I'm just going to kind of run it kind of wherever I want throughout my sky. Okay. And once it starts to run out, you can see it's not as strong now. It's getting a little streaky. Stir it up, tap it off. I'm going to go to my purple. So I'm going to let these blues and purples kind of mix together. So I'm painting with my purple. Again, when I get to any of the lines for new sections, once I get close to my pumpkin or my grass, I am going to slow down a little more. Move my brush slower, because this paint is still out of my pumpkin. So if I get the purple on there, it's going to start blending into my orange, and then it turns into like a muddy, not very pleasant brown color. So I really, I never want to start painting right there, because the water might travel into the pumpkin. So I start painting kind of far away, and then I'll slowly bring my brush in close to the pumpkin. And you can just alternate between your blue and purple. You can be the artist and decide if you want a little more purple, a little more blue. The more you stir your color, the darker the purple and blue will be. The less you stir it, the lighter they'll be. But again, watch how much water you're bringing into this, because you don't want puddles. So once you get going, you really do want to tap off your brush and maybe even give it a swipe on your messy paper, just to make sure you're not putting puddles of water on here. They're going to spread out of your control. That is something with watercolors that we really need to be practicing all the time. I'm going to go real slow around the edge of my pumpkin. Okay, and I'm also making sure I'm not leaving a lot of just white spots. I want to fill the space with color. Okay, I can see a little bit of my orange kind of bled out there, so I'm just going to blend that in the best I can. Okay, so now for my grass, yep, I guess we're going into green, so I'm going to give it a good stir. Okay, I'm going to start filling in my green grass. And it's going to be sort of like the sky, where we're going to bounce between green, and we're also going to add a little bit of yellow in there. Green is made of yellow, so sometimes it is a little yellowish. Make sure you're cleaning your brush before you go into your yellow, because the yellow really will get messy very fast if you are putting a colored brush into it. Okay, my green's not showing up very bright right there, so I am going to stir it up a little bit more to make it a little brighter. And I'm going to go in real carefully when I'm coming up to my sky, when I'm coming up to my pumpkin. I don't want those colors to mix. Okay. Could be done, but I'm not calling myself done yet because I still have some white spaces. Okay. Now, one thing you can do if you want as a little extra is we can add a little bit of a shadow underneath our pumpkin. So I'm going to go in, get a little bit of blue. And again, I don't want it to be strong. A little bit of blue will darken up. I'm going to go right underneath where my pumpkin sits. And just put that little dark line. Now I'm wiping my brush off. And just like before, I can kind of go over it and blend that into the grass. It'll help make it look like the pumpkin's sitting on the grass. All right, so there is my painted pattern pumpkin. I hope you enjoyed this project. Oh, wait! Look what I forgot. All right, so this is a tiny little space, so I didn't wake up my brown, but luckily I don't need a ton of it. So I'm going to take a quick dip, a quick spin, and make sure I'm being extra careful because it is a tiny space. If you see you're getting puddles, just wipe your brush off on your messy paper. There we go. Now this might need a second to dry and soak in before you pick it up and carry, or just make sure you pick it up with your hands nice and flat so that your paint doesn't run, okay? But when it comes to cleanup, if I have any extra instructions, I will let you know.